Hey guys, my name is Haley, and I've had to refilm this video twice, and that's why it's coming to you so late. But yes, this is finally my top favorites of 2024. I have revamped this list multiple times. I filmed it in like a weird version of it on my phone, and then it refused to go through my editing software, and I had to scrap the whole video. That I tried every single thing to try and fix it so I didn't have to refilm it because it was 45 minutes of footage and nothing worked, so here we are. So I have a top 14. I think this was a top 20 at some point, and after filming it over and over and over and realizing which ones I had more to say about, I feel like I have whittled it down a little bit. So these are my favorite books of 2024. I will say the top 10 is pretty solid. I made sure to include the other four, which is how I ended up with 14. But my top three for sure is super solid. In the order, the rest of them changes daily, so there's my disclaimer. But number 14, I'm going to put Dead Serious by Vaughn Cassidy. This series is so fun. If you've been here around here for a while, you've heard me talk about it multiple times. I've given the same spiel every time. It is about this man who is a mortician, and he's very introverted. He doesn't really go out a lot into public or hang out with his friends, but it's like his birthday party, so he goes out with a couple of his coworkers, and at this restaurant he chokes to death on an ice cube and technically dies for a couple of minutes and then is brought back by the paramedics. And then he realizes the next day when he goes into work that he can see ghosts as he is working on the body of a deceased drag queen from a queer club nearby. And this drag queen named Dusty starts to follow him around and convinces him to look into her death because there were mysterious circumstances. And this is very much a murder mystery. He starts working with the cops. He starts dating one of the cops. And it is them solving the mysteries of people who have died because he has to, he wants to help the people who have passed on to get some closure. But also, it's just a very funny romp because the drag queens are hilarious. I loved Dusty so much, and this is probably the most fun series that I read last year. Next up, I have Lilith by Nikki Marmory. This is the story of Adam's wife in the Garden of Eden before Eve, because in this version of the story, this is very much, it follows biblical times, but from another perspective. And this is as if Adam had assaulted his original wife, which was Lilith, and she refused to submit to him because of it, and therefore she was banished from the Garden of Eden by God. And then Adam got Eve, and the biblical storyline follows as does all of the Bible stories. But this is told from the perspective of Lilith, who was banished, and she is constantly trying to figure out why a loving God would have created men above women. And she learns that there is another god, or in this case, goddess, out there. And she goes on a search to find out what happened to Asherah, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, who is this other goddess who is supposed to be on par with God and what God did to her. And why women were given this lot in life, because that was not the way the world was supposed to be. And this very much follows all of the Bible stories that we all know and love and or are horrified by. And I loved this perspective, and I would love to read more books along these lines. So if you have any other recommendations that sound remotely similar to that, please send them my way. Next up, we have The Har by David Sodergren. I've read several of his books at this point, and I really enjoy all of them, but this definitely was my favorite. It was also the first one that I read. And this is the story about an old woman who lives out on this random Scottish isle. It's an island. It's a bunch of mainly older people who live here, and this company wants to come and start drilling there for natural resources, as well as to build some sort of billionaire's cottage away or something like that. And the residents are very upset about this and start to cause an uproar. But as the company starts trying to buy people out, giving them exorbitant amounts of money so they will just leave, because they cannot legally banish them from the island or get rid of them or legally do that. So they go against every other possible way they can think of to get rid of these people. And this is about our very stubborn old woman who is just like, I'm not leaving and you can't make me, and I will not take your money. And her taking her stand. But as she is watching many of her fellow people leave the island and take the money because they have no other financial choice because of what this company is doing, she goes out to the ocean and finds this creature. And she brings it home in a wheelbarrow and puts it in her bathtub, and it lives in the water. And mysterious things start to happen because of this creature. And I love this. This has like definitely become one of my favorite like horror novels. It's made the favorite horror novel list very recently, and I love everything David Sodergren does. And this is a very, 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 very good one. And I was happy to add it to my favorites of the year. Next up, we have a very hard read that took me a month and a half to read because of the political climate of America. And that is The Blueprint by Ray Gianna Rashad. This is the story in which women are enslaved in this version of society. And this woman has been promised to a very, very wealthy politician, white male politician. She is black, and she very much, in this world, that is just how people of color are treated. They are married off to a man, and they basically live as concubines. They have no rights. This is set in technically the state of Texas, but like the US is very much in a dystopian place. There is only one area of the country, which I believe is technically like Louisiana, like map wise on this. And it is the only place in the country where this law is not in effect, where women can live freely. And it is about her trying to escape the clutches of this man that she thinks she is in love with, but also she has never known better and has definitely been groomed to be in this situation. And it deals very, very heavily with racism. If you are horrified by the political climate, please check triggers for this. Please look into it. Please protect your peace, because this was a very hard book for me to read. I decided to read it literally, I think I started it the day before the election by mistake. And therefore, once the election happened, it took me about a month and a half to be able to bring myself back to it and finish it, because it is a dystopian hellscape that does not feel so dystopian anymore. And that's terrifying. And this made me cry. It was a very hard read. If you're looking for something else after like Handmaid's Tale or any of the other big book like banned books that are going around, I highly recommend this one. If it is not banned, it will be soon. I think the only reason it's not is because it definitely flew under the radar when it came out like early in 2024. So highly recommend, especially if you've never heard of it, to look into this. And again, check your triggers, because it is a hard read. I will not censor that at all. Next up, we have the book that has been the bane of my existence since, I want to say, the beginning of BookTube, and I've been on BookTube for like 8 years, and that is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This was everyone and their mother's favorite book back in like early BookTube days, like, oh gosh, 2014, 2015-ish, if not earlier than that. I started my channel in like 2013, so around there. And I have tried to read this so many times. I tried to listen to the audiobook, couldn't get into it. I tried to read it on ebook, couldn't get into it. I think I even owned it physically at one point and tried to read it, couldn't get into it. For like many years, I kept trying, like once a year, every October, to try to read this book. And for whatever reason, I could not, like, it did not click with me until this past October when I decided to just sit my butt down and binge it. It's also told in very much mixed media format. For people who have not heard of this, I feel like I've been hearing about it forever, but I know there's been a whole influx of newer booktubers who were not around back in that time. And this is the story of a man who was disgraced as a reporter many years ago because he tried to look into this cult filmmaker named Cordova, who has this massive cult, like very mysterious following. And he makes a lot of things that are like involved in like the dark web and like certain forums. He has a bunch of forums online that are like password protected for his fans, and it's very mysterious and very weird. And this man tried to look into him. It did not go well for him. He lost his job. It kind of ruined his life. He got a divorce. Like, and this is years later that Cordova's daughter has been unalived, and the reporter decides to dive back into this, even though this is the man that ruined his life, almost as a revenge thing, but also just because he's a reporter, he wants to know the real story. So he goes to look into what happened to Ashley Cordova, because her death seems very strange, and that only adds to the mystery around Cordova himself and how weird things happen to people that are involved with him. But I honestly think the first like 100 pages of this are just slow, and that's why I was struggling to read it so many times for the last many, many years. Because once I got past the first 100 pages and into a lot of the documents and stuff, I was hooked. And the last like 250 pages of this were fantastic. I loved the entire end sequence of them going and getting to the bottom of Cordova and stuff. I'm not going to spoil it, but it was so good. I have a bunch of dog ears that I need to annotate that I still haven't done, but I highly recommend this one. Even my partner was like, "You never read with your face anymore, and you've had your hands glued to that book." Like, I read it into the night, which I really don't do at all, ever anymore. And he was correct. I was very much hooked on this. Next up is another horror. This is a very horror heavy year, especially with favorites. And that is Mary by Nat Cassidy. I've become obsessed with Nat Cassidy. I've read everything that he has out. I'm very excited for his new book that comes out this year. But this is the story about a woman who is at the age where she is entering the menopause, but she starts having these hallucinations of these like sheet angels. Like, it almost looks like a ghost with a sheet over it, but she describes them as angels and they never speak to her, but they're really fucking creepy and they like cause her to hallucinate other things. And so she goes to the doctor and is like, "Hey, I've been having these hallucinations," and the male doctors are just like, that's just part of menopause. And she's like, I don't think so. I don't think that's correct. And so she moves out to, I believe it's like Arizona. It's like somewhere out west, to stay with what I believe is her sister or her aunt. I believe it's her sister. And she continues to see these creatures in her aunt's bathroom, particularly in the bathtub, which is why I love that the cover is of the bathtub in this. And she starts to uncover some very mysterious paranormal type things, and it may or may not be involved in cult practices while she is out there. I loved this. I tabbed it. I stayed up again late into the night reading this, which I don't do anymore. So apparently, horror has been the way to do that for me this past year. But highly recommend this. Also, The Clerk that I bought this from up at a bookstore in Michigan, actually, when I bought it or was going to buy it, they were like, "Do you like horror?" And I was like, "Yes, I read a lot of horror." And she was like, "Okay, good." Because I'm not a big horror person, and I tried to read that book and I had to put it down because it scared the shit out of me. I was like, "That's a great endorsement, thank you." And she was correct. Next up on the horror train, we have Slewfoot by Bram. I wanted to read this for years, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't read it sooner. This is the story of a woman back in Puritan times, in early America times, in which her husband dies very early on in the book, and she wants to continue running his farm by herself, but that was not a thing that women did back in the day. And she also has to like get permission from the church to skip church, because church was very much mandatory back in these times every Sunday. And if you like dozed off in the church, you would be like poked awake or anything like that very aggressively. So when this woman decides to stop coming to church and start running a farm and do the jobs of a man, the society is not into it, and there's a man in town who starts to like, he's trying to discredit her. He's trying to like say this isn't okay, women aren't allowed to do this, that, and the other. And so he starts accusing her of being a witch, which at first seems just like very like mundane Puritan society of like, oh, every woman who doesn't do what I say is a witch. But also she seems to have a sort of paranormal element of this creature who lives in the woods who is trying to help her. So their thoughts may not be completely unfounded, even though that was not her intention to begin with. And this is honestly one of my favorite witchy books. I loved the way that it wasn't like in your face witchy the way a lot of witch books I feel like are. This is definitely more, I don't know what the word is, like cultural. Like, it was way more about certain superstitions and creatures in this time than it was about like, I'm a witch and I do spells. It was not that very much at all. Next up is a book I feel like I've been talking about nonstop with it since I read it, which baffles me because when I picked up this cover, I was like, that looks like a fun horror novel that I'll read once and like put back in a little free library. I was wrong. This is the story of a very Amazon, Walmart, those type of big box store-esque thing called The Store that was started to take over small towns, and I believe this is set in Arizona. Yeah, Juniper, Arizona. And some weird stuff seems to happen. The store always like is very much like, I don't go against other retail big box stores. We only go for small towns and like try to bring money to their economy by opening a big box store, which also in turn means runs all of the small businesses out of business until you have no choice but to go to the big box store in the end. This falls under the category of what I like to call capitalism horror. I have a couple of these books and I don't have enough to make a recommendation video, but I might still make the video because it sounds very fun to me that I've read like 2 or 3 books that I feel like definitely fall into this category. And you have other ones that are similar, please let me know. But my favorite thing about this book is that it's very much a commentary on big box stores like Walmart and Amazon, those type of things. Like retailers who very much have destroyed local economies because they are now a complete monopoly in the small town area. And that sounds like a very like topical thing of the recent years, right? Guess when this book was written? 1998. This was commentary in 1998 before Amazon or Walmart or anything like that even were what they are today. So this is a conversation that's been happening for a very long time, and this feels very eerily similar to a lot of issues in the United States, especially right now. And I loved it for that. I have tabs, or at least dog ears, as you can see. I love this. I've talked to many people about it, and I think more people need to read it. Next up, we have The Invocations. This is the story of 3 girls who are intertwined in weird ways. One is our main character, arguably, who very much has this vendetta and like anger about the fact that her sister has died and is very determined to find a way to raise her from the dead. And then we have our rich, affluent girl who has been kind of shunned from her family because she got a invocation or a conscription or a spell put into her leg and it went wrong, and therefore her leg is like rotting off. So she's been like isolated to this house, and the family doesn't talk about her because they don't want to talk about what's actually happening, and they've made it out as if she had a mental break. And then our third character is a orphan who has been like sneaking in and out of college campuses and learning things that way, and she became a spellcrafter and she writes these invocations for people, and then these 3 girls band together to find out that somebody is chasing after people who have received invocations written by this girl specifically. And a whole thing in this is this also very much talks about LGBT rights and issues, because there is a slight sapphic romance going on this along with all of the gore and everything else, but also in this world, like, men aren't supposed to have the witchcraft powers, and the creature that seems to be hunting down witches or people with these invocations does seem to be a male, and this baffles all of them as they're trying to figure this out. Also, a lovely subscriber of mine who I am forever indebted to because I've been talking about this since like last summer, sent me their Evernight copy with the beautiful sprayed edges that I've been seeing everywhere that is always like literally $150 on Mercari because resellers are crazy. And she just sent this to me and I just had to pay for shipping from the UK. And I just wanted to publicly say thank you so much because this is not one of my prized possessions because it, as you can see, is one of my favorite books of the year. But yes, I loved The Invocations. This is super dark, super gritty, super violent, but also very, very good commentary on queer issues as well as witchcraft, as well as feminism. Like, it has everything that I love in a horror. Next up, we have We Came to Welcome You by Vincent Torrado. This author has very quickly made their way up to one of my favorites of this last year, but this is a story about a lesbian couple who moves into a new town or a home where there is a HOA, a homeowners association, and they get a lot of like racial prejudices as well as them being gay. And this town seems very uptight and also very white, and our main character and her wife are not white. So they feel like there's a lot of racism going on in this town. The town also is like saying that they don't care that they're lesbians and they're very supportive and everything, but there's definitely something off happening. There also seems to be this really strange tree that is in their backyard at their new house that like seems to do some weird stuff. Like, they keep finding tree branches in the vents of their house and they're like, how in the world does that happen? And also the neighbors all seem like very off, like something is strange going on. There's a lady next door who keeps having weird things happen that they keep seeing glimpses of out their window, and they're like, did I really just see that? And then the entire people who come over to talk to them like gaslight them, like, no, you saw nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. This town even has their like token gay man who lives there, and they're like, oh no, see, we like the gays, we have a gay. Like it's very sinister and very creepy. On top of all of the actual horror commentary, there's a lot of political and like queer commentary as well, which I loved, and I highly recommend this if you have not read this. I definitely picked this up purely on the cover. I remember seeing the cover right before it came out and was like, I need that. And I was correct in my assumption that I would love it. Next up, we have Gay the Pray Away by Natalie Naudus. This book destroyed me. So this, in a very simple terms, is a sapphic book about a girl who is raised in a religious cult, and she meets this girl who comes to see her. But also, this book hits very, very, very close to home for me as someone who came out of religious cult, and very much is thinking about finally coming on here and talking about that as an experience. So if you're interested in that, please leave a comment down below, because it is like a different way I want to take my content. That's another story. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about favorites. Anyway, so this is very much a girl who grew up very, very, very sheltered and very conservative by her very conservative parents. Like, she goes to the library thinking, oh, maybe I'm not straight, because she started to feel feelings for this new pretty girl that has come to her church that very much isn't a part of the cult that she's in, but has been like forced there by family members. And so she goes to the library. There's a scene in here that makes me sob my eyes out every time I think of libraries and how they're allowed to exist. She goes to the library and is looking up queer, young, like YA fiction, knowing for a fact that her parents would never allow her to check that out, and that they like look to see and go through everything that she checks out from the library because she's homeschooled. And there's a scene where she picks up what is actually One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, which is another one of my favorite books of all time. And she realizes it's a sapphic book, and she was like, oh my god, I didn't know this was allowed. I didn't know there was fiction for it. She's never heard of this before. She's very young, very sheltered, has never been outside of this religious cult. And so she steals the book and like hides it in her shirt and stuff. And a librarian sees her do it and just looks the other way, because they realize that if this child is going to these lengths to steal something like that, they probably need it. And she has to like go home and like rip the cover off of it, even though it makes her want to die, because you can't do that to books. But she hides it inside of another Bible so she can read it, and it helps her learn a lot about herself, and it made me sob my eyeballs out. As someone who was not raised in the religious cult but joined it as a like very young like teenager, late teening, like I was 19 when I joined my religious cult, and I was in a very bad mental space and looking for anything. And this book made me think of so many of the young girls in that congregation that I was in that literally do not know that there is another way. There are other options. There are that queer people exist, and that it's not a sin, and that they won't go to hell just for loving someone. Like, this was very, very real and very close to home for me. And I actually asked for the arc of this before the book came out back last June, because I found the author on Bookstagram, and she sent me the arc. I cried my eyes out, and I pre-ordered the book for when it came out. And it's one of my favorite things ever. And I definitely need to like go and annotate it, because obviously I read it on ebook. And then we're in our top 3. Next up, we have The Spirit Bares Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White, who has very much made themselves into one of my favorite authors in a very short period of time. This is also annotated. I actually need to go through with a highlighter and everything, but this is a story about a trans teen boy set in the 1800s, in which in this society young women were just like married off to the highest bidder, and like married off to a husband, and that's what you did, and you like took care of the house and made babies. He is also autistic, and he is trans, and yet everyone in his life is just telling them, oh no, you're a girl and you're going to go get married to a man. And he's like, no, I'm not a girl. And he goes to try to get out of his arranged marriage, and they have decided to diagnose him with veil sickness, and therefore like the equivalent of like madness or hysteria, because they think that something is wrong with their girl that they're trying to marry off. And so he gets sent to a sanatorium, and there are ghosts and things happening at the sanatorium. He also finds a lovely group of like found family within the other people at the sanatorium, and it is both the most heartbreaking story of queerness set in the 1800s I've read in quite a while, but also it's paranormal, which are two of my favorite things. And if you throw those together, I cry a lot. And it ends up on my favorite books of the year list. I still need to read Andrew Joseph White's new book, Compound Fracture, which is over there. But he's very much become one of my favorite authors, and I highly recommend him to anybody who has not read this yet. And we're down to our top two, which I feel like I haven't shut up about since I read them. The second one being Dayspring by Anthony Oliveira. This is the story of what if Jesus and John the Beloved were gay. That was all I read when I picked this up in the bookstore in Columbus, Ohio. And I was like, sold. Give it to me. It was like $35, which I would normally never pay for a book. But I was like, I need that. I've never heard of anything like that. It is also written in verse and very much set up as if it is a Bible and mentions a lot of Bible stories. Like the red text is literally Jesus, like it is in an actual Bible. But the other weird thing about this story is that it is not a linear story at all. If you've ever read Lincoln and the Bardo by, oh God, who wrote that book? I don't remember. I'll throw up a picture of it. If you ever read this book, I feel like it gives me the same vibes, but more biblical and gay. Because that's a story about Lincoln and his dead son. But anyways, this is very non-linear. Like there are scenes that are very much set in Bible times and like Jesus making his commentary about how people have like literally misinterpreted his words. And then it'll like fast forward to like modern day where Jesus and John also exist within this realm and are like smoking weed together. So like it's a weird book, but I loved every single second of it and all of the biblical commentary about how people misinterpret and how different versions of the Bible like were made and everything like that. If you are an ex-church girly, please read this. It's going to be a hard read for a lot of people, especially if you like are very much only a romance reader, but I need more people to read this. I cannot explain. I think I even have a vlog. I'll link that down below if I can find it. I have a vlog of me reading the Gay Jesus book because this impacted me so much and more people need to read it, and I've never met another human being who have read it. So please read this. If you just want Gay Jesus and John, that alone should sell you on it like it did me. And then last, my favorite books of 2024. I have the special edition over there, but I've already shown that off many times. You might be able to guess. Is The Godly Heathens duology by H.E. Edgman. The first one being Godly Heathens, and the second being, hitting myself in the face with it, Merciless Saviors. This is a story about Jem, who is a non-binary teen living in the South, and they are having really strange, weirdly vivid dreams, and they're like, that's kind of strange. I don't know what that's about. And they start to become more and more vivid over time, and then Jem realizes that they're able to interact with the dreams in a certain way, and then a new girl comes to town. And this girl, Willa May, comes in and acts like she has known Jem her entire life. And Jem is like, I don't know you. You just moved here. How do you know me? And Willa May seems to know about these dreams. And also, at the same time as all of this, the more contemporary version, because it sounds very contemporary, right? Joke's on you, it's not. This isn't contemporary at all. It just starts out that way. But Jem also has this friend who lives in New York, who they like Skype and like FaceTime with all the time, named Enzo. Enzo is very much like, I was obsessed with Enzo. I love him as a character. But anyway, this starts out in a very contemporary, like, let's talk about religion. We're queer in the South. That there's a lot of commentary surrounding that, but this turns into so much more involving Jem's dreams and things that they didn't know about themselves. My only caveat that I will give you, because I want you to go into this as blind as possible, like I did, is there are like gods and goddesses involved, and you find out how. And this was one of the best plot twists that I had ever, like, that I'd read in a very long time, and that's really what got me hooked on this. But also all of the commentary about the queer teens in the South hits very close to home for me. Enzo as a character reminds me very much of a person that I know in real life, and therefore I loved them with my entire soul. There's also a lot of poly commentary going on in this. I loved everything about this. I have read, I think, everything that H.E. Edgman has read or written. Yeah, because I read their Fae Keeper, or the Witch King. The Witch King is the first one. I read that duology as well, but they also have a new book coming out this year, and I could not be more excited for it. So that is my favorite book of 2024. It is a cop out because it's duology, but this is my channel and you can't stop me. But yeah, I am not even going to try to hold up this stack because that will only end in disaster. So you get my top 3. But thank you all for watching. I hope that I can finally get this video up because I've been trying to get it up for 3 weeks and fighting with technology, and think I need to get an external hard drive because I feel like that would solve a lot of these issues. So if you're a YouTuber and you have any suggestions for beginner external hard drives for YouTube, please let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what your favorite book of last year was. But thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.